Now, as Israel's army continues to hit Gaza, the United Nations General Assembly has voted overwhelmingly for a resolution calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. The resolution, drafted by a group of 22 Arab countries, passed by a margin of 120 to 14, with 45 countries abstaining. The United States and Israel voted no. What story do these numbers tell? Let's speak to Oscar van Heerden, who's a senior research fellow for African diplomacy and leadership at the University of Johannesburg. Thank you so much for your time this evening, Oscar. I don't think many people would be shocked at the United States and Israel voting no for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. But what does this all tell us, given the humanitarian crisis that is unfolding in the Gaza Strip?
Yeah, no, good evening, Heidi, and to your viewers. I mean, this is very, very worrying. It's very concerning that so many countries come to the United Nations General Assembly wanting to intervene, and they are not wanting to necessarily pronounce on who's right and who's wrong. All they are wanting to seek is for humanitarian truce, for there to be a temporary ceasefire in order to get the necessary humanitarian assistance into Gaza that is so much needed by many. The hospital supplies, water, food, and so on. These are all things that these countries, these 120 countries that voted for the resolution, is saying that we need to get to the Gazans, the Palestinians in Gaza. But it seems, unfortunately, there are still those that are hell-bent. As we see with the votes, 14 countries voted against the resolution, of which the United States and Israel is surely two. And then, of course, 45 abstentions. And when I looked at the list, most of those abstentions are from European countries.
Which is really interesting. I mean, there have been calls to say that the way the Western world has responded to what's currently going on in Palestine is really telling. And it's clearly obvious, given the death toll in Palestine, considering what has happened in Israel, it's obviously more intense in Palestine. I mean, we've been reporting that over 3,000 children are among those that have tragically died in Palestine because of what's currently happening. Things are expected to intensify. Do you not think that this is a further call for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire? I just find it so mind-boggling that people would vote against, a ceasefire, given what's currently happening.
The thing, Heidi, is that it seems to me that the Europeans, or the collective West, is in a bit of a dilemma. On the one hand, they have chosen to brand Hamas as a terrorist organization. And they see Hamas as having committed this terrorism on the 7th of October. And so at no stage do they want to compromise on things like self-defense, and hence the rhetoric that Israel has the right to defend itself. And I agree with that right. The problem is that the enemy is Hamas, militia, militants. And so if that is the enemy, then surely, and you say you want to rid yourself of that enemy, you must then go after that enemy. And the enemy cannot be represented by the general population of the Palestinians in Gaza. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that none of the collective West is wanting to contextualize the attacks of October 7, gruesome and atrocious as they were, tragic as they were. No one wants to ask the question as to why it happened. Instead, the amendment that Canada proposes, the L26 addendum, is wanting to put this matter squarely on what happened on October 7, and therefore to condemn Hamas, and that is the terrorist organization, and that's why, in some perverse way, justifies what the Israelis are then doing to the Palestinians in Gaza. And 120 countries said no. We don't want to point fingers. This is not the time to point fingers. This is a time where there are thousands and thousands of people that are under occupation, that are besieged, that is constantly being shelled and bombed, and is dying in their thousands. if you take, Heidi, the 1,400 unfortunate deaths of Israelis on October 7, we are now getting to exact a measure of revenge and anger. The Israeli Defense Force has now to date killed more than 7,000 Palestinians, and they say they are not stopping anytime soon. There's talk of a ground invasion. Secondly, we're talking of 17,000 Palestinians now injured who require medical assistance, and the medical supplies is not being provided. And finally, 1.1 million Palestinians in Gaza is now displaced, being told that they must all go to the south of Gaza. So the situation is extremely dire.
Extremely dire. And I mean, you touch on the issue around Hamas and it being the terrorist group and the attack being on Hamas, but the reality is that Palestinians are being attacked here. Palestinians are being killed. It's not the Hamas terrorist group that's being attacked here, which I suppose is just a reaction by the Israeli Defense Force. Just lastly, Oscar, where do you see this going? Because as much as the United Nations comes in, they try and have these votes, there are calls. If you have the Israeli government and the Israeli Defense Force saying, we will not stop. I mean, I'm not sure if you heard any part of that interview that I had with our correspondent where she says, the Prime Minister really going out and saying we will do whatever it takes to get Israelis back that are currently being held hostage. It doesn't seem as though it's going to end anytime soon. And that's very concerning, also given the fact that there's a communication blackout at the moment.
President Biden and Netanyahu wants to be the individuals that dictate how this crisis is going to unfold. We see that they are the ones who are in agreement for the continuous, indiscriminate bombing and killing of Palestinians, and yet they are also the same people that are telling us that they've decided to allow some form of assistance, some humanitarian assistance, etc. It seems as if it is only them that is going to manage what happens with the Palestinians. But to answer your question, Heidi, it might sound cruel, but the truth of the matter is that either more than 1 million, if not all, the Palestinians in Gaza is going to be forced through the Rafah border into Egypt. Egypt is obviously going to say no, but when people start breaking down gates and wanting to get away from the mass murder that they are facing, they are going to end up in the desert and they will not be given the right to return, regardless of what Israel is saying. So that's one outcome. Two, you either kill all the Palestinians, and it seems 45 abstentions and 14 voting against the L25 resolution is okay with that. Kill all of them, because it seems Hamas equals terrorism and terrorism equals Arabs, and Arabs are the Palestinians. And so we must kill all of them. And then thirdly, sanity seems not going to prevail, because if so many countries are saying there needs to be a ceasefire, a humanitarian truce, and talking to try and diplomatically find a solution to a problem that is more than 75 years old, no one is interested in it, it seems. And so, unfortunately, the Palestinians in Gaza are on their own.
Oh, it's so tragic, but thank you so much for your insights. We really do appreciate it. That was Oscar van Heerden, who's a Senior Research Fellow for African Diplomacy and Leadership at the University of Johannesburg.